Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today on how to successfully complete the Performance Standard Seal and Outstanding Award application for chapters. Today, your presenters will be myself, Jennifer Steffen, the Chapter Relations Manager, and Brian Smith, who is our Area 8 Chapter Ambassador. If at any time during the webinar you need technical assistance, please let us know in the Q&A box. And during the presentation, you may submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to get us started today. These are the areas that we're going to cover and talk about. We're going to just recap a little bit the 2020 participation in the awards and recognition program. We'll talk about the purpose of the programs, and we'll go into detail about filling out the Performance Standard Seal application, submitting the Outstanding Award, and we'll go over some tips from past submitters of chapters for both of those applications. So first, I want to start, and I think it's the best place to start with acknowledging all of those chapters that earned their Performance Standard Seal in 2020. As you can see, they're all listed here. We had 27 of them that participated in the program. I think the one thing of note, and we'll talk about this again throughout the webinar, is that it really didn't matter your chapter size and your ranking. So we had small, medium, large, and extra large earn each one of the seals. So it was really spread out evenly through those that participated, regardless of the size of your chapter. So again, congratulations to these 27 chapters that earned their performance seal last year. For the Outstanding Chapter Award, we had 12 chapters that participated in that. And congratulations again to Utah for winning Outstanding Chapter and Membership, Rocky Mountain for Outstanding Chapter Operations, Tampa Bay for Outstanding Professional Development, and the Copper Chapter for Advocacy and Outreach. One thing to note, again, we're talking about chapter size here, is that this award, and we'll talk about it in detail, is not based on your chapter size. And the way it played out, we had a small, medium, large, and extra large chapter win in each one of these categories. So again, it was really about the programs and the things that you have in place that advance these chapters up to winning, and had really nothing to do about chapter size. But again, we wanted to recognize all those chapters that took the time and the effort to participate, and not only winning their pop-up banner, but also giving us their best practices that we put into the online resource library. So first, let's talk about this new recognition and awards. We launched it last year. 2020 was our first year, and we wanted to look at it as a two-layered approach for chapters for recognition. And one is that Performance Standard Seal, in which we set a standard for chapters through a bunch of yes and no questions and numeric responses, in which that we would like chapters to reach a standard to be a chapter of NIGP. And through that, you're awarded those digital badges that are either bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. This really allows you allows us to remove that bias towards chapter size. And it also allows you to look at areas that your chapter needs to maybe start focusing on. We have told chapters that are maybe not choosing to participate in the program that this application really is a great way for your board to look and do a checks and balances of what areas your chapter is not maybe providing any services or programs to your member. But again, it's a way for you to recognize your chapter and what they do well. The Outstanding Chapter Award is more of that competition part of the recognition, and this is where we recognize outstanding chapters and best practices. And those are offered in 4 different categories, and one is given a winner in each one of those and gets that pop-up banner that we always present at Forum on Stage. And I think the other piece to this is that not only do those winners get that recognition and that banner, but we really are trying to, in the intent of that program, is to really increase our resources in the online resource library. So every submission that comes in through the Outstanding Chapter Award gets sorted and put into the various places of our resource guide, and it really allows those best practices to shine to all the other chapters as good things that you should be working on to implement within your chapter. So why participate? This certainly allows you to promote the profession. I think more than anything, it promotes the efforts of your chapter in advancing that profession. And I think in a lot of cases, you get that acknowledgement and respect that you deserve for the hard work that your chapter and your volunteers put together. And I think we really worked hard as an ambassador, the chapter ambassadors, to really simplify and cut down the amount of time and effort to put into each one of these awards. So those who used to do Chapter of the Year awards, you knew that it could take hundreds of hours, is not even an exaggeration, and lots of documentation. And we really cut that down into maybe doing both of these submissions in a 2 to 8 hour time frame. So we really made it much easier for our chapters to participate in. I do have a couple quotes here that I included from Tanya, who is the president of the Utah chapter, and just 2 things that I underlined that I took out of her quote that I think resonated. These programs really give you the opportunity to learn your chapter's strengths and weaknesses, and gives you insight to your chapter board on specific goals for improvement. Again, that goes to that piece of, when in doubt, to look at that performance standard seal application to see where your areas of focus should be. Maybe if you're doing your strategic plan this year, it'll help you guide where you need to go on some of those subject matters. And also it showcases your work, and it allows the rest of us an opportunity to take back those ideas. Again, it's for that outstanding award. It's sharing those practices and allowing chapters to duplicate some of the things that you are doing at the chapter level. So that's kind of why we participate, how it's structured and set up. And now Brian and I are going to go into kind of the specifics and details about the applications themselves. So Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about the performance standard seal.
Thanks, Jen. The performance standard seal application was, and as we go through this, you'll see some of the intent of that design, and I'll harken back to why it's structured the way it is, because I think that helps make it make a little more sense about what we're trying to do here. But we've got 57 questions that are split up into 4 different categories. The thought behind this being, these are really the big areas of membership or of performance that are the kinds of things that your chapter should be looking at in terms of how well are you doing as a chapter. And as you go through each of the items, 43 of them are just yes or no's, and 14 questions are looking for a numeric response. All of these answers are, this is an annual process, so each year you do a new application, and I think it's short enough that it doesn't take long to do, and particularly if you've done it last year, it should be actually quite quick to go through this, but it gives you that updated information. And the reality is that on the performance seals, things change from year to year, and so it's a good opportunity to be checking in on how your chapter is doing. So chapters need to be current with all of their required reporting forms, and while we are not requiring reams of documentation to validate all of your answer with your submission, NIGP does reserve the right to go and audit that submission. So we figure we're all professionals, and that what you're submitting is actually true about your chapter. So, and one of the things we figured out early on too is for several of these items that are on the application, they ask for things where it's really helpful to have some information that NIGP happens to have. And so Jen stepped up and offered to run some reports for chapters and make those available. And that made it so much easier in terms of record keeping, because NIGP is already keeping records on the items that are listed here on this slide. So it's been, so that's been really helpful, and that gives you a sense of, because you may not be tracking at a chapter level the items that are on these.
And
You wanna do
Brian,
the
if I
next?
could just add to that, so anybody who is planning to fill out the performance standard seal, starting next week, if you just want to email me and say, Jen, can you give me all the required forms? I will email these three groups of listings here, the attendance in any of our virtual forums or VCons, the listing of conference and webinar speakers, and listing of any volunteers, councils, committees, and boards. So I will have all of those ready to go for you next week. You just need to email me and ask.
So the application itself, as you look at these, as you look at these items, one of the things that I wanted to, the way it's structured, essentially the yes or no items, which are the bulk of them. So the first, I'm having a problem. Let's see, that's the first page. So does your chapter prepare and adopt a current year budget in conformance with a formal policy? That should be a fairly straightforward yes or no. And then the grayed out measurement column there is just grayed out because you don't need to put anything in there. And then we have the actual activity. And then the last column is we've tried to provide, you don't have to put anything in there. And because we found folks were putting things in there last year, but the idea was that was for some of these items benefit from explanation by having examples of what exactly do we mean by this. So for example, that number 7 there, did your chapter conduct a financial audit? One of the clarifications people asked last year was, do you mean an internal audit or an external audit? And we said, well, that's pretty good. Either. It's good to know that. And you should be doing that as a chapter. So we put that clarification in there of internal or external. As you're going through this and filling this out, if you have things where you go, I don't know exactly what that means, or I need some clarification, that's exactly the kind of thing that you should be doing, reaching out to Jen and asking those questions, because not only do we use those to improve the items from year to year or to add those clarifications in the examples column, but we also will often add those to, there's an FAQ document as well. So that's really important in terms of a continuous improvement process for this whole process. So please, please pass those along and ask those questions rather than just simply guessing what the intent was, those kinds of things. The items, actually, can you go back one for a second,
Sorry.
Jen? You're jumping ahead.
Sorry.
I just wanted to talk about, I wanted to set up the next slide by saying, if you look at that number 8 on the first page there, what percentage of your general operating budget is allocated for scholarships or financial aid programs? This is a good example of a question, and implicit in this is the fact that you do have a budget that's allocated for scholarships or other kinds of financial aid programs. That's a fairly common thing, and particularly for chapters whose job it is to do education and support of professional public procurement people. We think that having some money in your budget is a good thing, which is why this is an item. And the percentage here is, I'm going to use this item as a good example of how we've set up these scoring items so that it really removes the difference between chapters by size. You can answer this, even if you're the smallest chapter and you have a budget, you can still answer this. This is a percentage question. And let's say 20% of your budget is allocated for scholarships. Your answer is 20%. Meanwhile, an extra large chapter, could they also have 20% of their budget? Absolutely. The raw number size of the dollars is going to be different, certainly, but we've tried to put these in terms then that we can do the split them into quartiles. And this is how we kind of really erase the difference between chapters by size. So that sets up the next slide. So how do we do the scoring on these? So for the items that are zeros and ones, yeses and nos, if you say yes, you get a point. If you say no, it's 0. It's pretty easy. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. And we've tried to take out the nuance in those questions, and that it should be a fairly clear yes or no. The other items that that have numerical scores on them, what we do is we take all of those percentages, and going back to that number 8, what percentage was it? 20% and that you had allocated for scholarships, and other agencies will come, or other suppliers, geez, I sound like a procurement professional, don't I? Other chapters will have differing percentages, and we take all of the percentages for everybody who has applied. And this is an important thing to remember when you're thinking in terms of math. Our universe is all the answers for all of the chapters who actually submitted this year. It's not last year's ones. It's not all chapters, because some may not submit. It's all of the chapters who have responded. And then we take all of those scores and we cut them into percentiles. And this is a standardized process. We actually use a calculator that's online, and we cut them into what are the lowest 25% of the scores, the next lowest, the second highest, and then the highest. So, and then what we do is we just assign 1, 2, 3, and 4 points, depending upon which quartile you're in. So this is really how you mitigate the issue of size for chapters. This often is probably the most confusing part of the math, but you definitely, this is something just to recognize that what this does is we're using this really to mitigate the size and to incent most of these questions. For example, more is better, higher percentiles is better. So is built into them if you look at them.
Brian, we have a question, and I'm going to go back a slide to this application because we're actually doing a reference here. And it says, if you answer to number 1, no, then how do you answer to number 8? Do you want to take that, or do you want me?
Go for it.
So to answer your question, if you do not have a budget, you're going to answer no and get 0 points. If you don't have a budget, then you don't know your percentage. So that will be a 0. So that way, so then we would be offering you 0 points for either one of those. If you do offer scholarships, unfortunately, you're not going to get the benefit of scoring for that because it's asking if you have a budget, and then we need to have that budget to do that. One of the questions is our chapters looking at their budget? You have $10,000 and $5,000 of it goes to a conference, $20,000 of it goes to scholarships, whatever it might be. I hope that answers your question. Brian, did I answer that correctly?
Sounds great. Yeah, we did have some people who got some chapters who got zeros on some of these items. Yep.
And then there's another question about this, and not just the scoring, but is there an audit process for verifying the information submitted on the application? We actually don't have a process in place. It's really a spot check. And I will tell you, last year, I did come back to 5 or 6 different chapters, and it was things that stood out to me of being a little off. It was a percentage that seemed a little high. It was a percentage that was different than maybe you put on your member data form, because there's a question that correlates to what percentage of your members are dual members for the Institute. So it really is kind of random, or specifically if you said yes to something and maybe that's a resource that we're looking for, I may reach out to you and say, hey, can you send me some information on that? But we don't have an actual formal process for that in place at this time. It's just kind of it's kind of random. Brian, you want to add anything to that?
Nope, I think that covers it.
So before we move on to the outstanding award, does anybody, those are the only questions in the Q&A, but can anybody, I thought maybe the scoring would instigate some questions or some thoughts. If you have something, type them in. We can always come back to them, but we really wanted you all to understand how that scoring happened, how your size doesn't play a factor in that, and that you did have to submit each year. You have to start from scratch. You can't use that old application that you used last year. You need to start from a new one. And again, these scores are going to be based on the applications that come in currently, not chapters overall, and not certainly anything that came in last year. Brian, anything you want to add to the performance standard seal before we move on?
No, well, one of the things I will add is the way in which this is structured, if your chapter applies, you will get a seal. Everyone gets a seal. It's just a matter of what level, but it also is something that gives you the ability to talk about, communicate, and measure how you're doing in comparison from a performance perspective to other chapters. So, and it's something that you could get platinum last year, and you could you're not necessarily going to get platinum this year because it's going to be a different group that's applying is the assumption here.
We have another question about this and another statement that I wanted to make too, because somebody emailed me earlier about, because of the structure and things that happened last year for many of the chapters, you didn't do some face-to-face things. You maybe didn't do a job fair or have a charity event or things like that. Also keep in mind that chapters are going to be saying no to those things as well. So our overall scores may be a little lower than we saw last year just because of some of the changes in the activity level of chapters. And that's okay, again, because it's only based on what's coming in this year. So you're only going to be compared to the activities chapters did in 2020, not the year prior. So keep that in mind. And we did get another question about if you're creating a budget now, will that count and be submitted? And unfortunately, it won't be. I'm glad to see that a chapter is looking forward. Again, I think this is a great application to look at to see some of those standard things chapters should have in place. But everything on this application is really based on what happened last year, not what you're doing between now and May when the application is submitted. It really is for all your activities, January 1 through December 31st of 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, again, keep thinking about it. Have a question, type it in. We'll get to it at the end. So now I'm going to talk about the chapter outstanding awards. So these are broken down into 4 categories. And as you can see, these are the same 4 subject matters that are in the performance standard seal. And that's operations, membership, advocacy and outreach, and professional development. So when you're thinking about where your strengths are as a chapter, really look at it. Is it your governance structure? Is it your policies and procedures? Is it how you recognize your members? And then you would think, okay, we need to go for submit an operations award. Membership, if you've had we've had chapters that actually had a lot of growth last year. You had a membership campaign. Maybe there's just a great amount of information or things that you do to support your members. That would be your award. Advocacy and outreach is really is what you do to demonstrate an effective advocacy for your members in our profession. Reverse trade shows fall into here. And then again, lastly, it's professional development. What are you offering? How much education are you offering? What scholarships are you offering? So again, those are the categories that mimic the same as the performance standard seal. And the criteria for submitting for an outstanding award is that you had to have completed the performance standard seal. That has to also be completed at the same time in the same year that you apply for this. You can submit up to 2 of these outstanding awards. So when you go back to this slide here, if you find that your chapter is really great in membership and professional development, you can submit an award for both of them. Or if you just want to do one, you can do one, but it does give you the opportunity to submit under 2 categories. When you submit your performance seal and your outstanding awards, they need to come in as separate documents, not one large PDF or Word document. And reason being is because we do put those outstanding awards into resource library. So we like them to come in as separate documents. So that means if you're going to submit, you submit the seal and 2 outstanding awards, that would be 3 attachments that you send to me. You must include that application page on the top. That must be your first page of your outstanding award. And then you can have 4 pages that follow that support and document what you're doing on the application or that criteria that you're putting together. It can be Word or it can be a PDF. And to do this, you can include text, photos, links, embedded documents, anything that you think supports that program or those activities that you're talking to. Make sure that you do not rely on those links as your descriptive of what's happening. Those are really for backup or for your judge to see the actual, say it's something on strategic planning if you're under governance. It's for them to look at it, but don't just rely on that strategic plan to get the points. You need to talk about your strategic plan, what your goals are, how you're going to meet them, things like that. And your submissions must follow the scoring criteria, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. We do encourage you to highlight 1 or 2 programs, not everything that you do for membership. And reason being is what we're trying to do, again, is a best practice. And we want to be able to have chapters to replicate that. It may turn into 5 or 6 different things that you talk about, but put it under an umbrella of 1 or 2 programs, whether it's member recruitment or member benefits, something like that. And again, all of these activities must be based on the prior year, which is 2020. So I talked about the criteria. So each one of the judges is going to be looking at these 4 criteria to be documented on that submission within those 4 pages. You need to be able to explain in detail so that another chapter could understand, adapt, or replicate. You don't want there to be any questions. And I always say more is better. You want to talk in detail about your program, how it began, how you continue it, the results. You want to be as specific as you can about all the nuances. And 2 then does talk about your results and outcomes. So your proof of success. Maybe it wasn't as successful as you thought. Maybe you wanted 10% growth in membership, but you only got 5. That's okay, but talk about that result and how you got there. The 3rd criteria is of uniqueness of approach or innovation. This might be innovative or new to you, but maybe not to somebody else. Maybe it's standard practice for you, but for another chapter it is something completely new. So we want to know about maybe you flipped a reverse trade show on its side and you did something different. Especially think about everything happened virtually and how this is where number 3 I think is going to really get pumped up this year, is you all had to pivot and do things differently. You had to engage the virtual world. You had to engage your vendors in a different way. So this is going to be an area where I think you guys are going to be able to excel in getting points in that. And they also want to talk about your lessons learned or attempts or others attempting to adapt or replicate it. So if you did something different with your reverse trade show or you tried a membership campaign, talk about how you maybe things you would have done differently. Wish you had started earlier. Maybe you wish you had engaged your board more in some of the outreach, whatever it is. That also still gives those other tips to a chapter looking at it to think about, okay, so they kind of got to their goal and maybe they do things differently this way to get to the goal, and maybe we'll try to implement those. So those are the criteria. Then judges are going to be looking at each one of those criteria and score it from 0 to 25 points. So it is broken down here from poor, satisfactory, excellent, and above and beyond. So they're going to look at number 1, how did you explain it in detail? Did you provide all the information that you could? And then a judge is going to say, yes, you went above and beyond and gave 1,000 details and are going to give you 25 points. So the max you can get is 100 points. The other thing that we do ask our judges to do on our scoring sheet is to say why they scored how they did. That allows me to then meet with you all after the fact on how you could have improved your application. What do they feel that you didn't go into detour? You didn't talk about a result, that you didn't say that you met your goal or you didn't meet your goal. So that way they give us good feedback that I can then have debriefs with each of you on how you can improve your application for next year. And another quote from Tanya, I think was great, that, you know, our best improvement is that we streamline the application and the document length. Those of you who have done chapter of the years previously, those sometimes are hundreds of pages and supporting documentation. And what we're truly trying to do is hone this in on those best practices, not kind of an overall for a chapter to talk about every nuance, but pick out those 2 or 3 things that you do very, very well and create it in a document that when I have a chapter that says, you know, we're struggling with our scholarship program, I can send them, hey, Utah has an incredible scholarship program. Here's their 4-page program on how they implement that. And that's really what we're trying to get out of this. And it also makes it so much easier for you all to put those together. So that is, yep.
So I want to underscore that piece is that when you are putting this together, that the frame of mind you should have for this is certainly, first of all, this is an RFP and you will have a debrief opportunity. So we all know how to evaluate RFPs. Now we have to essentially write a response that's like an RFP. So, and that it's really built into that criteria is when you look at that number 4, where these ultimately are going to end up is, yes, we'll have whoever gets the highest points and they'll win for the year, but then they all end up in a library where they're accessible to all chapters. And the idea is, as a chapter, we are trying to build a library of best practices of something then that can be picked up a couple of years from now, that another chapter can pick up and go, oh, I get what they did. We could do that at ours, or we could modify it, those kinds of things. So just kind of keep that perspective in mind. And I think those ones will score better when you have that mind frame filling them out.
And I also think that, you know, it also, I think emphasizes is to your other chapters and how NIGP feels about it, that everything you do is, in my mind, is a best practice, is a good product of being a chapter of NIGP. And while we do recognize that winner, I think everything you do on some level is important. And we have so many chapters that are looking to do things differently or try something they haven't before. And that's why I think it's so important for these to also not just be winners, but be part of this document library of best practices. And to get into a routine that this is something you do standard every year as a chapter, that it's not just because we want to submit for an award, but we're submitting 2 ideas that we want to populate the best practices of the library in to share with other chapters. So this becomes something that just is part of your process every year as a chapter.
Hey, Jen, there's a in the chat, so a request for this presentation. We can make it available, right?
Yes, but this presentation is recorded and the PowerPoint will be posted on the chapter resource library, and the recording will be sent afterwards. The question I see in the chat right now is about if this is training is for state chapters only of the NIGP. So yes, this program that we're highlighting today is just for our 72 chapters to use. It is not broken down into a county award or a city award. This is for our chapters of NIGP to be recognized, again, for their performance and for best practices.
But I will say, and that comes from Melissa Proud. So I will say that one of the things that if you are a county, if you look at the National Association of Counties and their best practices, if you go on their website, look at their best practices, this is modeled very much. It was influenced. That was one of the influences on the design of this. So if you want to, at a particular agency level, you could certainly go and look at that if you're a county.
Thanks, Brian. So now I'm just going to highlight some of we had 3 or 4 chapters that submitted last year that did give us some tips. And I kind of want to go through those. Again, please keep the questions coming as you think about them. So let's talk about some tips. Something that Lori Newton sent to us. She's the past president of VAGP. And she recommended the chapters that submit that are unsuccessful continue to resubmit and look at other submissions to see what other chapters are doing and doing well. I think that's some good advice that, you know, your intent is to hopefully win the banner, but to not take that as a negative. And I don't see it as a negative because you've provided us resources for other chapters. And again, that allows you to see what other chapters are doing and what they're doing well. So Damaris from our Central Florida chapter gave us her top 10. And I'm going to go through them. I think each part of them has a good point to talk about. I would review and go through the application first. Collect everything that you have. A lot of people start folders or files, but read through the application, collect everything that you have from newsletters, from email blasts, put them all together. And then as you go through the application, you can sort through what you have and where it applies to what you're submitting. It's a team effort, and I agree with that. While this is not as big as chapter of the year, that certainly doesn't mean you can't rely or support on others within your chapter. If you're applying for professional development and it's the role of the past president to fill out these applications, tap into your Pro-D from last year. Have them send everything that you worked on or the flyers. Things here that she talked about is having more than one person review. It's always good to have somebody look at these, double check it, maybe have your board look at it, especially for the outstanding award. If you're doing some links or some embedded documents, make sure that other computers and devices can read those. They use a scheduling software, especially I know when they did chapter of the year and there were lots of moving parts. That still doesn't mean you can't do that here to organize if there's several people working on putting an application together. Look at applicants' previous winners. So when you land on the awards page, you will see all the winners and their applications. From last year for the outstanding awards. You won't see the performance seal ones, but just the outstanding. And then down the right side, you'll see all 12 of those submissions. So I encourage you to look at those winning applications before starting to put yours together. I think it'll give you a good idea of why those maybe excel to the top. I like what Damaris says, don't be discouraged. It was the same thing that Lori said. We encourage chapters to continue to do both of these programs each year. It can be overwhelming. I think it's once you've done it once, it's easier and you'll understand. And especially with both applications, once you've done it once, you know what you're looking for. And then historically, the chapter year after year knows, especially with the performance standard seal, what those things that we're looking for. While we will look at both of these each year and modify them from feedback that we get, the foundation of it will stay the same. And as always, reach out. And that's why Brian talked about that FAQ sheet. If you have a question, ask me. Jen, does this include instructors? Does this include if an ambassador came to visit us? When in doubt, ask me. And then I'm going to create that FAQ sheet that I'm going to keep current on that site. So every time that we get a question, I'll add it there, because my feeling always is if you have that question, I'm sure somebody else has it too. So thanks, Damaris with Central Florida, for giving us that feedback. Carrie Sheehan, who is the past president for RMGP, gave us 3. She said think creatively at first glance. There may be things that you did during the year that you don't think fit into anything. I encourage you to think creatively and to use, again, what you may think is a normal activity for your chapter may not be normal for another chapter. So you may think, well, that's just our process, or that's just how we do it. But that's what another chapter wants to hear or know when they try to replicate something. I think being organized goes back to the same thing that Damaris says, is, to collect all that information, put it together systematically, keep a folder that you go to where you keep those flyers and things, and also to have fun with the process. Since we've not made it so daunting and so complicated, we're hoping that it will be something that more chapters want to participate in, because we have made it an easier process to do. So thanks, Carrie, for those. Mary Ellen Williams, who's the past president of SCAGPO. Interesting in both of these last two that you see, it is the role within their chapter for the past president to fill out these applications. It's interesting to see how other chapters have this structured. Some actually have a committee that comes together and puts together either one of these forms, or I'm starting to see that past president position. Somebody who just lived all those activities for 2020 is a good role for somebody to fill this out. Mary Ellen talked about starting in January, start early. We always have these applications out in the late fall, early winter before the end of the year. It gives you plenty of time to to put those together, but knowing that it's coming next year and you know the categories are staying the same, start creating those files early. If this is going to be a position that's within your board structure, have them collect everything that you send out and everything that you do. That way, when it comes to putting those 4 pages together, it's not as daunting because it's already in one place. And this is a great recommendation, is ask who put it together last year. Maybe they can help guide you, glitches they found, lessons learned. Her recommendation was to let your board know that you're doing this and keep them involved. So if there are any requests of maybe a committee or a board member, somebody does your communications and your email blasts, that they know about this so it's not last minute. And she also feels to look at the previous year's submissions, go back and see what others submitted for this award. So thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you all for your tips and feedback. So our last slide here is just a resource slide. So both of these applications are due May 21st of 2021. This link will take you to that landing page that has the application. It has a description of both of these awards. For the outstanding, it will list all the winners and show their application as well as all the other submissions that came in. Last fall, the Utah chapter did a webinar on, as they were the winner in their category, on how to put a successful application together. And not only is it good about how they put the application together, I encourage you to watch it because it highlights their member benefits and things that they give back to their chapter. So it's a good webinar just as a best practice to watch of some really great things that the Utah chapter does. And again, Brian and I have said it a couple times, is submit and give me your questions so I can develop this FAQ sheet. It allows us again to let everybody know of any changes or questions that asked. And almost all those FAQs then allow us to make some changes or updates that we need to that application form. So it will make it easier for the next year. And here's information for myself and Brian with emails and phone numbers if you have any questions. So that is the end for today, but I want to give us here a few more minutes. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask, I don't have anything currently. But if you have any questions on either one of the approaches, concerns, maybe any feedback because you've participated before, I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Brian, you have anything you want to add before we end?
Jen, I was trying to remember what the average time to complete this was, and it was my recollection that the seal took somewhere in the 4 to 10 hours total to be able to do that.
It was opposite. The performance standard seal was the 1 to 2 hours, right, and the outstanding award was anywhere from 5 to 8 hours.
Yeah.
So that was the longer one.
So I think that's an important takeaway for everybody. This whole thing was really redesigned to make it low barrier, because we're really of the belief that the information in here, while it's competitive and you get a seal or recognition for outstanding practice, you actually, by virtue of going through the process of just doing the application, get some really good information about how your chapter is doing and where are the areas that you could be, what are the things you're not doing, and what are the things that you could be focusing on in the next year. And so really the redesign was designed not just to be recognition, but actually to give you actionable information that you can use at your chapter moving forward. So I hope folks take advantage of that. Even if you didn't submit, just simply filling out the forms would give you information you could use at your chapter.
And I also think if you've submitted last year, or start with the mindset on your board that this is something that you will participate in every year. And if you're planning along the year and collecting information, knowing that it comes out in this fall and knowing that it's very similar questions, 1 or 2 of them maybe tweaked a little bit, that you can have everything ready when it's time to put it together, that it actually may not take 5 to 6 hours to put together because you have everything in a folder. So I actually think it's something for the chapters to think about, is just both of these being part of your yearly process as a chapter. It's a good checks and balances with that performance seal to see where you are. And then again, to share those best practices, that one program that you really want other chapters to know about. And again, I think it's key that even though you think it's just something you do on a daily basis, it's been around for a while, but maybe you enhanced it this year, it could be brand new to somebody else. And they could be struggling with that. So to see it play out could be a great resource. I don't see any other questions. So thank you all for joining us today for our 45 minutes. I see it in the chat, and I just want to reiterate again, we will be sending the recording out. I also will be including the PowerPoint in the recording in the chapter online resource library under our webinars section, and I'll have that there early next week. And also next week, you can start requesting those forms so that I can help you fill out some of those questions on the data that NIGP collects. Then if that's it, thanks everybody, and have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.